that. Okay, so I would just like to mention that next week, which is the week of what, the 24th, I think, the 24th of July, next week in any event, I will not be giving any classes. I'm going to visit some family, and we will convene once again. I will send out an invitation and we'll convene as usual. So no class next week, none of the classes next week. So, okay. Having said all that, half shekel, right. Having said all that, I'm going to share a screen. And the screen share is to Sefer Yetzirah. And we are in Sefer Yetzirah, the second Mishnah, the second teaching in the first chapter. Here we are, 1, 2, that's it. Yeah, the first chapter, the second Mishnah. The teachings in Sefer Yetzirah are divided into what's called Mishnayot, or Mishnahs. Why? Because of the very, very early work, and that's how they did things. Very cryptic, very succinct statements with not that much explanation. And the explanation is up to the commentaries to explain. And they do. The commentary that I'm usually giving you, or giving you part of anyway, is the commentary that's gathered together from Hasidic masters. And it's a commentary which is, you won't find in the classical translations, you won't find it in Aryeh Kaplan or anywhere else. You won't even find it in the original Hebrew versions with all the commentaries in Sefer Yetzirah, because these had to be cleaned and gathered and put together and researched and so on and so forth. So there you go. Okay. In the previous Mishnah, what did we speak about in the previous Mishnah? One of the things that we started speaking about in the previous Mishnah was the 32 paths of wisdom. Now, we explained in the previous Mishnah that there are 32 paths of wisdom in creation. Those are the 32 creative channels, so to speak, by which the world comes into being, with 32 different paths which are feeding this world in which we live in. In fact, all of the world. Because we did explain also that these 32 paths occur in all of the immanent worlds, all of the immanent planes of reality. And there are 4 immanent planes of reality, 1 transcendent plane of reality. The immanent planes of reality, again, are the world of Asiya, the world of Yetzirah, the world of Bria, and the world of Atzilut. And then the transcendent world, or the transcendent world, will be called Adam Kadmon, the world of Adam Kadmon, the all-inclusive world of Adam Kadmon. Okay. Just let me see, there's some chat over here. Yeah, okay, there we go. All right. So we had discussed again that there was the 32 paths, or the 32 channels, called the Lamabet Netivot HaChochma, the 32 paths by which Chochma, the Sphira of Chochma, enters into creation. And then there are the 32 paths by which divine energy, not the creative energy of creation, of existence of any of the planes of existence, but 32 paths, 32 channels by which godliness is revealed. Generally through the Torah, through the teachings, through scripture, and through the rabbinic teachings, which interpret scripture. And there are 32 paths there as well. And in this, there are also 5 dimensions. There's really the 32 paths of the 5 levels of consciousness. The 5 levels of consciousness, starting from the bottom up, are called nefesh, which is physical consciousness. And then there is, which again, the 32 paths in physical consciousness. Then there's 32 paths of the level called ruach, which is the second level. Ruach, spirit or divine spirit, or the emotional energy or emotional intelligence, if you like, I think that's a term that's used often in psychology today. Emotional intelligence is probably like maybe 15, 20 years old. But the truth is, emotional intelligence was a concept that's mentioned already in Kabbalah many, many decades, not just decades, many centuries before this term emotional intelligence. In any event, the emotional intelligence of Ruach, and then there's the intelligence, the intellectual intelligence of the level of soul, which is called neshama, or the level of consciousness called neshama. That's pure intelligence. And then there is divine intelligence, or godly intelligence, which is the world of Atzilut, corresponding to the world of Atzilut, the level of Chaya, and then corresponding to the world of Adam Kadmon, the highest, the meta world, the transcendent world, is the transcendent level of soul, a transcendent level of consciousness, which is called Yechida. Yechida means, essentially, it means united. It's the unified and united level of consciousness. It's consciousness that's united with God's consciousness. It's God consciousness in its purest form, and it is always called Yechida Leyachtach. It is always united with and brings the unity of godliness into realization, into manifestation, into awareness, into consciousness. Okay, so that was what we spoke about more or less in a nutshell in last lesson. And in this lesson, we are going to talk about what are these 32 paths comprised of? And that's what this Mishnah comes to tell us. So it says like this. Here is, I'll just read it in the Hebrew and then I'll translate it. I mean, the translation is here, but anyway. Eses Sfirot Blima, ו-22 אותיות יסוד, 3 אמות, ו7 כפולות, ו12 פשוטות. So there are 10 Sfirot of nothingness, and I'm going to explain all this terminology shortly. 10 Sfirot of nothingness, 22 foundational letters, 3 mothers, all called imot, 3 mothers, 7 doubles, 12 elementals. Now, when we talk about these 22 foundational letters, the letters are divided into these 3 categories, called the 3 mothers, the 7 doubles, the 12 elementals. And shortly, we are going to explain what those are and what they're all about, what they mean, and which letters they are, essentially. Okay, but first of all, we have to explain what's the difference here between the Sfirot of nothingness, what he calls the Sfirot of nothingness, or the Sfirot Blima. The word in Hebrew, the proper word in Hebrew is Blima. Now, I'll explain this in a minute. And we have to discuss the difference, what these Sfirot are, and why they're called Blima, they're called nothingness or without definition, and what the difference is between them and the 22 foundational letters, and why are these the things that make up the 32 paths? How does this work exactly? Okay, so to begin, the 32 paths of wisdom in both spheres, creative wisdom and divine wisdom, the wisdom of creation and the wisdom of divinity, are all these 32 channels are all pathways by which the light of the Sfirot reaches its destination. Now, let me just explain, first of all, what the Sfirot are. Now, everyone's heard of Sfirot. I assume anyone who's looked into Kabbalah anyway has heard of Sfirot. Sfirot are usually translated as, well, actually, I don't really translate them. Sfirot are divine emanations, I suppose you could call them, divine emanations, which are, the purpose of them is to bring sapirut ubehirut. The word in Hebrew, sapirut, means clarity. In other words, clear light, ubehirut, brightness, into manifestation in the world. So the Sfirot are basically portals, I suppose you could say, portals through which the light, the divine light shines. Now, when we say light, we only mean it obviously in a figurative sense. We don't mean it in a literal sense. There's no light per se. It's just an interesting metaphor. Prior to the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, who lived in the 1500s, prior to his era, the Kabbalah did not generally use the word light all that much. It was the Arizal that started using the word light. What they used to use is the word atzmut. Let me just show you in, all right, I'll do a share screen 1 second. Whiteboard, here we go. Here the word in Hebrew would be atzmut. Yeah, atzmut, which means essentially it means essence. That's what it means. Atzmut means essence. Like, for instance, if you with atzmut that's how it would be spelled. Atzmut, right? So, atzmut means the essence of things, and with slightly different spelling, it would spell the word atzamot, the bones. Just like the bones are what keeps the body from sort of collapsing in on itself, so to the atzmut is the essential being of something. So the old Kabbalists, let me write that in English for those who are more familiar with English. Atzmut. Okay, atzmut. So the Kabbalists before the Arizal, what the Arizal refers to as or, OHR is the way it's usually written, OHR in English, or, meaning light. What the Arizal refers to light, the older Kabbalists used to refer to as atzmut. Why atzmut? Because it's the essence, it's godliness itself. It's not the vessel into which it goes, but it's what goes into the vessel. It's what animates the vessel, what gives it its life, essentially. Compared to, the Kabbalists often compare it this way. The comparison is between the soul and the body, right? The soul is the life force of the body. And when the soul leaves, in other words, the person passes, or in a state of great dveikut, which I'm going to speak about tomorrow, by the way, the concept of dveikut, cleaving to God. We'll speak about that tomorrow, but in tomorrow's class. But the idea of passing away, when a person passes away, so the body remains, at least for a time, right? It starts disintegrating. The truth is, our sages tell us that the body starts disintegrating and returning to dust, so to speak, almost immediately. It starts to integrate. Obviously, it takes a period of time before one can recognize this, but it starts to lahasriach, it starts to decompose and disintegrates basically right away once the person is no longer alive. Unless, of course, you keep it in the fridge and so on and so forth, and as is done in funeral homes and so on. But in any event, that's what actually happens. So the way the soul is to the body is the way the atzmut is to the kelim, in the old terminology of Kabbalah, and the way light is to the vessels in the terminology of the Arizal, right? The way the light is to the vessels. In other words, the energizing force that keeps the thing alive, that keeps that sphira alive. So we have a sphira. What does the sphira essentially represent in this particular I should have, wait a second here, let me just go back to the text. What does the sphira represent in this schema over here? And when we talk about the 10 sphirot of nothingness, we're not talking about the vessels. We're talking about the or, about the light that goes into the vessels. That's why they call the 10 sphirot of nothingness, because they don't have any kind of physical quality to them. They're like the soul to the body. right? The soul doesn't have a physical quality. The life force is clothed within a body, and therefore the body is alive, but the life force is not the body. It's the life force of the body, but it's not itself the body. Despite what scientists and doctors and so on and so forth may tell you, that the chemical process is just a result of the person being there, of the person being alive. They're not the life of the person. There's much more to the life of the person than simply his life force in a physical sense. And therefore, one can understand why it's necessary for the Kabbalah, excuse me, for the Kabbalah to discuss different levels of consciousness. The physical consciousness is the physical life force. And because the life force of the body is in the body, therefore we're aware of the body through that lowest level of consciousness. But there's much higher levels of consciousness that transcend that. Okay, so when we talk about the Eser Sfirot Blima, these 10 Sfirot of nothingness, we're talking about the various qualities in the light itself. Now, you could ask the question, and it would be a very valid question, what distinguishes one Sfirah from the other if we're only talking about on a spiritual level? What distinguishes them? One would think that all of the light is of one piece. It's all the same thing. It's all the same light. And that would be true. And in fact, the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who was the great Kabbalistic sage that preceded the Arizal, that was in fact the way that he saw it, that the Atzmut is all one Atzmut. And that's why I call it Atzmut. It's all one light. The Arizal doesn't call it Atzmut because it's true that Atzmut essence is all of one piece. However, the lights are not all of one piece. It's like light after it comes through a prism. It's all light, but it's different wavelengths of light. And the Arizal wanted to explain the divisions within light itself. These are the Eser Sfirot Blima, the Eser Sfirot without substance, that are manifested. I'll get back to that question in a minute. That are manifested in, they're manifested within the vessels. Now, what are the vessels? The vessels are essentially the 22 letters. Those are the vessels. Now, as you are fully aware, I'm sure, a letter on its own, at least in Hebrew, it's not necessarily true in English, but a letter in Hebrew, if it stands on its own, it has no meaning. Words in Hebrew have to have at least 2 letters. 2 letters, 3 letters, 4 letters, 5 letters, on the rare occasion even 6 letters, but a 1-letter word has no meaning. There are no 1-letter words in biblical Hebrew, and even in modern Hebrew, you don't get 1-letter words. You get like the definite article in English, a hat, a cup, right? The letter A stands for same as the or one, whatever. But in Hebrew, you don't get that. So the letters, therefore, these are the vessels, and in order for the vessels to work, they have to work at least in pairs, if not in 3s and 4s. Those are the letters. Now, the letters themselves are, as I mentioned last week as well, the last week or the week before, the letters, I think it was the first weeks that we spoke, that we started learning. The letters are letters of speech. Man is called a speaking creature. It says right at the beginning in Genesis that God breathed into Adam's nostrils the breath of life. And interestingly enough, I just learned something last night, which I'll tell you about in a second. He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living creature, the English translation. However, the Aramaic translation, the Targum called Targum Onkelos, says, Vayehi ha'adam lenefesh chaya, and man became a living creature. He translates as, he became a ruach mamalala. He became a speaking spirit. the spirit of speech. Man became a speaker. So the Hebrew letters represent the 22 possible sounds that the mouth could make, which you find, in fact, in all languages. It's all the same 22 sounds, basically, just in different combinations. But the sounds are basically 22. And or combinations of these 22, or the sounds of the mouth. But the basic sounds are 22 in number. Okay. So since these are the letters of speech, the energy that goes into them flows out of the 10 sfirot of nothingness, out of the 10 sfirot that themselves have no substance. They're the aspect of nothingness. They have no substance. And it's the letters, therefore, that become the vessels. So these 32 paths are therefore comprised of two different aspects. One aspect is the energy, the divine energy, the light, or in the old Kabbalah terminology, the atzmut, the essence. And the other is the vessels. Together, these make a composite structure of 32 things. Now, you may ask a good question. Why do we count it as 10 and 22 to make the 32 paths? Why don't we just count the 10 sfirot in the 22 letters as they manifest in the 22 letters? Because then you would lose sight of the fact that these are lights that are not always manifested in the vessels. We want to emphasize the idea that the lights are not always manifested in vessels, and therefore we speak about them as a separate category on their own as the 10 lights, in order to emphasize that point, that they're not always clothed in vessels, and then there are the vessels, the 22 letters. Okay. Let me just answer y'all's question now. Is this path only in one direction towards Malchut for emanation to the world? If so, is it an upward transmission towards Chokhmah, or is there also a downward transmission from Malchut of that Sphira to the Keter? It works both ways, because a path, I think I mentioned this actually in one of the classes, but a path always has two directions. It's from above to below and from below to above. It's just like a path, although there are, in electronics, there are generally, as far as I know anyway, I'm not an expert in these things, but I do believe that they can make one-way paths that only go one way, like you have a one-way street. But generally, the streets are kind of two-way things. In other words, the path of travel from above to below is one side of the street, and then the travel from below to above, the movement from below to above, is, so to speak, the other side of the street. So both of them are there. Good question. By the way, that name analysis I started, I didn't finish it yet. I mean, very busy. All right. Yeah. Okay, so let's continue. The letters themselves, as the vessels, are divided into three categories. And these are the three categories that we find over here. These are the three categories: 3 mothers, 7 doubles, and 12 elementals. Now, what do we mean by these? First of all, they're called 3 mothers. They're called 3 mothers because they sort of give birth to the other letters. How do they give birth to the other letters? Because of the nature of these letters, they are, let's call them, they are the producers. They are things that produce other things. And therefore, the 3 letters that we're talking about, the 3 mother letters, are the letter Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the letter Mem, which is the middle letter of the alphabet, and then the letter Shin, which is the second last letter of the alphabet, not the last, but the second last. All of these have been explained. There are various explanations of why they are why they're called mothers and how they give birth to the other to the other letters, but let's just put it this way. The way the Baal Shem Tov explains it is like this. Aleph is the most basic. Aleph is the most basic of the letters, right? It's the first letter of the alphabet and the most basic. The second letter of the alphabet, Bet, each letter in Hebrew has a numerical value. So a numerical value of Aleph is 1. The numerical value of the second letter of the alphabet is 2. The numerical value of a Gimel is 3, right? And so it goes on. But, so it goes all the way up until Yud, which is 10, and then Chaf is 20, Lamed is 30, Mem is 40, Nun is 50, Samach 60, Ayin 70, Pei 80, Tzadik 90, and then Kuf 100, Reish 200, Shin 300, Taf 400. But the Baal Shem Tov explains that the letter Bet, the second letter of the alphabet, is essentially 2 alephs. That's what it is. It's 2 alephs. It's no more than 2 alephs. That's all it is. It's, since the gematria, the numerical value of it is 2, therefore it's like 2 alephs. The letter Gimel will be 3 alephs. The letter Taf, which is equal to 400, will be 400 alephs. So therefore you can understand why the letter Aleph is a foundational, it's a mother letter, so to speak. Now, the other letters, Mem and Shin, are more difficult to explain, but let's put it this way. The Mem has 2 forms. There's an open Mem and a closed Mem in Hebrew. If the Mem comes at the end of a sentence, at the end of a word, rather. If it comes at the end of a word, then it's called a closed mem. If it comes in the middle or the beginning of a word, it's called an open mem. But a mem is a fundamental letter. It's a mother letter in the sense that it encompasses all directions of space plus openness. And the Shin has 3 prongs, and therefore it expresses 3 directions: up, down, and in between, up and down and in between, or right, left, and the middle column, or front, back, and the center. It expresses itself. That's why these 3 letters are called the mother letters. But to explain a little bit better. These 3 letters, the Aleph, the Mem, and the Shin, correspond to to Keter, Chochma, and Bina, according to one explanation. To Keter, Chochma, and Bina, the first 3 Sfirot. According to another explanation, it corresponds to Chochma, Bina, and Da'at. Chochma, Bina, and Da'at. Of the imminent Sfirot, Chochma is the first Sfirah. If we include the transcendent Sfirah, if we include Keter, then Keter is the first Sfirah, and we don't count Da'at. But if we're talking about the imminent Sfirot, in other words, the ones that are actually manifested rather than the transcendent ones, the transcendent one is Keter, then we would, if we talk only about the imminent, then it would be Chochma, Bina, and Da'at. And there are those that say we can even go on a lower triad and call them Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferet. Let me just see, I should have gotten up a chart of the Sfirot. 1 second, let me see here if I can find it. Yep. All right. So this is what we were talking about before. That Keter is the transcendent. Keter is the transcendent Sfirah. That's beyond the all the Sfirot. It's the source for all of them. But if we only want to mention the imminent Sfirot, then we would count only Chochma, Bina, and Da'at. But one of the opinions is definitely that we're counting Keter, Chochma, Bina. Da'at is usually, in this diagram, it's not placed as low as it should because it wants to show you the channels. All right, so that should be a little bit lower, but really, or alternatively, again, according to the other opinion, a third opinion, it's chesed gvura tiferet. So those are the three letters of Aleph, Shin, and Mem. All right. Where are we here? Sorry now. Seeing all my translation text and things like that. Okay. All right. So, what are the seven doubles? The seven doubles are those letters that have two pronunciations. They can be a soft pronunciation or a hard pronunciation. The soft pronunciation, well, first of all, which are those letters? They call the letters of Beged, Kefret, Bet, Gimel, Daled, Bet, Gimel, Daled, Chaf, Pei, Resh, and Taf. Those are the letters. Now, all of those, they call the seven doubles. They call again doubles because they have two pronunciations. For example, the letter Bet, and let's go again to the whiteboard, and I will show you what I mean. Let's just clear all drawings. Okay, the letter Bet can be read as Vet, or if it has a dagation in it, if it has a dot in the middle, it's read as Bet. So it has two forms, Bet and Vet. So it depends how you pronounce it in the word. For instance, the word house, the word for house in Hebrew, bayit, has a dot in it. But you get, for example, the word, there's a word bad bavad, right? Bad bavad means at the same time, bad bavad. So the second bet, or the third bet actually, does not have a negation, it's pronounced v. Okay, so that's bet. And then the letter Gimel, I'll do it in, that's the letter Gimel. The letter Gimel in our modern Hebrew pronunciation does not have a hard sound. But in the Taimanim, the Yemenite Jews do pronounce it, do have a hard pronunciation. It's called Gimel or Jimel. Right? Gimel. That would be, if it had a negation, it would be spelled, it would be pronounced Gimel. All right, same thing with Daled. Oops, Daled. Oh no, that's wrong. Daled. The Daled also can be pronounced, again, in modern Hebrew, you only have a Daled sound, you have a D sound. But in Yemenite, which is the ancient Hebrew, it's pronounced J, right? If it has a dagation in it. And so too, you have Kaf, and Chaf, Pei, and Fei. Resh, again, doesn't have a hard sound today in modern Hebrew. It's just pronounced R. But in the ancient Hebrew, it was probably pronounced sort of a guttural resh, right? And then there's Taf and Saf. Okay, so all very nice. What is all this about? This is all about these seven letters. There's 7 letters here, called the 7 kfulot. Stop share and go back to where we were, the previous share, over there. This share is the 7 doubles over here that we're talking about. These 7 doubles represent 2 states of the emotional qualities. There are 7 emotional qualities. What are the 7 emotional qualities? The 7 emotional qualities are personified by, I'm assuming everyone can see the chart of the Sfirot here, am I correct? I hope you can see the chart of the Sfirot, otherwise yeah, okay, good. I'll talk to you soon about your question. Okay, so the chart of the Sfirot, in the chart of the Sfirot, if you can see the Sfirot here, these Sfirot here, Chesed, Gvurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, and Malchut. Right, I left out Malchut in this blue bar or whatever, blue box. These are the 7 emotional attributes of the soul. 7 emotional attributes, 7 emotions: kindness, severity, and so on and so forth, compassion, and so it goes on. There are 2 states in which these can be found. There's the soft state and the hard state. The soft state is more sort of, well, let's call it the passive. It's more of a passive state of things, whereas the hard state is, it's pushing that quality. So therefore, these letters represent these 7 emotional attributes, of which there are 2 states: the passive and the active, or the hard and the soft. Now, without going into it here, because it's going to take us off the path if we speak about it too much, that suffice it to say that those are the that's the representation of those 7 letters. And to get back to our text now, where are we? Got so many things up here, I don't even know which one we're on. All right, let me just move this one down. And seems to have disappeared. 1 second, I'm sorry here, folks. Oh, here we go. There we are. Okay. All right. I really need 3 screens, not 2. Okay. Or 4. More messages. Okay. All right. So we now come to the 12 elementals. What are the 12 elementals? The 12 elementals are the Sfirot as they are, the paths as they are, without any sort of embellishments. They don't take any embellishments. They don't take any changes, hard or soft stances. They are just the way they are, and they represent, or they're parallel. Actually, they parallel the 12 tribes. They also parallel the 12 gates that there were to the temple. The temple had it had 13 gates, but the 13th gate was for those people who did not know what tribe they came from, or for converts to Judaism who weren't originally part of a tribe, and therefore there was a 13th gate for them. So those 12 letters represent the 12 gates of the temple. Sorry, just let me switch that off here. Okay. So those are the 12 elemental letters. Now, again, what is the idea here? The idea is that these letters, since they are movements of the mouth, they are movements is the wrong word. Okay. Good. That phone call finished. So the idea is that these 22 letters, in 3 different ways, in the way of the mother letters, in the way of the double letters, in the way of the elementals, bring down or are vessels for the lights, the energy, the atzmut, the consciousness to be manifested. And now we can see how that works. When you have letters together, letters working in tandem, either 2 letters or more, then the word has a meaning. There's a word and the word has a meaning, or will usually have a meaning. Of course, there's words that don't have any meaning. In not all permutations have meaning. even though a permutation might not have meaning in the language that we know, it nevertheless has meaning in some context or another, not necessarily meaning to us, but it has meaning in its own right. So therefore, in order for the consciousness to flow down into the world, so therefore these letters, gateways, paths join together as vessels and draw down the light into them, and this consciousness is manifested therefore through the letters. Okay, let me address a couple of questions here. Okay, the first question, since they produce, are there by any chance, I don't know what the RT stands for, Bina? Yes, they are related to Bina. That's why they call the mothers. The three mothers are related to Bina, yes. In what situation would be lower the relationship of the letters to the motives? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Yeah, letters relate to the intellect, but letters are also, don't forget, when we say words, words can just convey a concept, or words can convey a feeling, right? Words can convey a concept. For instance, let's just take a word that's used quite a lot recently. Fool, the word fool, right? The word fool can just mean someone who is not very smart and get things wrong. But if you say it with passion, right, that conveys an emotion. You fool, right? That's that conveys it conveys a whole concept, an emotional concept, not just an intellectual concept. Yes, it has an intellectual concept as well, but it also has an emotional content, and it also has an active. It can also have an active content. In other words, it can lead to physical action, like what they call in Yiddish a pachimponim, a slap in the face or whatever, something like that. I don't want to get violent here, but that's just using an example. Okay, let's see. There were a couple of other questions. What connections are there between the elementals and the elements? Earth, fire, water. That's an interesting question. As far as I know, there is no connection per se, but there is a connection in the sense that all the letters are foundational letters. We said that there's 22 foundation letters. Why? Because they're the foundation of creation. The world was created through divine speech. Now, when we say speech, we obviously don't mean speech in the sense of human speech, but divine speech means certain words, in other words, certain combinations of energies were expressed, and that's where the world comes from. The sages tell us in the Ethics of the Fathers, the world was created through 10 utterances. These utterances all use the foundational letters, the 22 foundational letters. Why? Because the foundation of all existence, the foundation of creation, the foundation of existence, the foundation of physical being, essentially, in the world. I hope that answers that question. One of the explanations, I'm just looking at my notes over here, is that they called foundational letters because just like the foundation of a building is critical to the building being able to stand and not collapse, you have to have a strong foundation. So too, these letters are the fundamental letters upon which other things are built. There's a whole structure that's built on top of the foundation. The foundation is only the 22 letters in the various combinations that were created at the time or put together at the time of those permutations at the time of creation. With 10 utterances, the world was created. and then in the beginning, the first chapter in Genesis, and those 10 utterances, and then everything else is built on top of that, from permutations of permutations and permutations of permutations of permutations, and so on and so forth. Okay. Any other questions? Let us see. Do they combine in various combinations to define the characteristics of the vessel they are in? Yes, they do. And that is often known. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, the word for clarity. Yes, sapirut. Let me just stop that share, and I'll make another share. I'll just show you here. Here, whiteboard. Here we go. Clear all drawings. The word in Hebrew is, well, I'll just write it in English. Okay, sapirut. Sapirut. Sapirut means clarity or brightness. Clarity. Sapirut ubehirut. Behirut, clarity, brightness. Sapirut. That's a U, by the way, not an N. Sapirut. Okay. See the other. Okay. Sapirut, the Sfirot also stand in a lower dimension of lower aspect of the Sfirot. It also stands for number. We spoke about that last week. That the word 3 Sfarim, the world was created with 3 Sfarim. One of them is number, right? Number, the story, and it depends how you explain it. We explained it last week. There's 2 different ways of looking at it. We like to think of it as the author, the word, and the book. Sorry, the author, the book, and the story. The author, the book, and the story. The author being God, and the book is creation, and the story of creation, how things move through history. What are the elements related to? If the 7 are emotional, the elements are probably related to, the elementals are probably related to the organs. To the internal organs of a person. It would seem there seems to be such a correspondence, rather than the emotional qualities seem to be related to the organs. But it's kind of hard to say that that's the case. I don't know how many organs there are. Are there 12 organs? There are more than 12 organs. Not every organ in the Hebrew way of looking at things is what they would call an organ in modern scientific terminology or medical terminology. Maybe to the body itself, yeah, it could be. I mean, there are 3, it's maybe just the arms and the legs, because there's 3 sections to the arm. There's the upper arm, there's the forearm, and there's the hand. That's already 6 because you have two arms. And same thing with the leg. There's the upper leg, the shank, and the foot, right? That's 3 and 3. That's another 6. So 6 and 6, 12. That would be correspond to the 12. But I think I seem to recall that they correspond also to the internal organs. Now, I could be wrong, but I could make a search of that and try and find it out. I'm not sure I'll be able to do it now, but in any event. Okay, any other questions? Not physical, but combination of spirit and physical. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it could be. Oh, the path of wisdom that was close, that's my soul entered. Oh, very nice. Nice to hear. Good. That's the purpose of these classes. The purpose of these classes is not anything other than to bring people to greater awareness, greater consciousness. So if I've done that, I'm very happy. I'm very happy indeed. Okay. All right, folks. It seems that there's no there are no other questions right now. Again, tomorrow night, I'm going to be discussing dveikut, to the concept of dveikut, cleaving, the soul cleaving to its source, and the various other explanations what dveikut is. This is a very important concept in Hasidic terminology, in Kabbalistic terminology in general, and in fact in the Torah itself. There's a number of verses that speak about dveikut, and we will discuss them tomorrow. Okay, so folks, have a great night, and hopefully I'll see you tomorrow night. If not, the recordings will be up as usual. And again, don't forget, next week, we do not have a class. No classes next week. All righty. Have a good one. All the best. Good night. Oh, thank you, Henry. Good. Good to hear. All right. Night, night, folks.